Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're planning. My name is Jem. I'm broadcasting to you from the United Kingdom, and today we're going to look at a fabulous Jessie James Beads strand called Girls' Night Out. You don't have to be a girl to enjoy this strand. Now, the colours are so beautiful and dramatic on this strand. I love things like this. I love the colour red. Purple's my favourite, but I absolutely adore red, and it teams so beautifully with black. Why don't we head down to the board? We'll take a closer look at the beads that you get on the strand. We'll take a closer look at the piece we're going to make together today, a lovely pendant, which contains a couple of different techniques which you can then apply throughout all of your wire jewellery. Let's pop down to the board and we'll have a look. So here's our lovely strand to work with. We've got a couple of the gold tone spacers. We have got very beautiful filigree bead caps. We've got red crystals in a variety of sizes. Now we've got these very large and clear rondelles at the end. We've got some ovals which have got a fabulous faceting to them. And then we've got these slightly deeper hued, a little bit more opaque red rondelle facets as well. In addition to crystals, we've got encrusted spacers, a couple of different types here. Lots of metal in these silver coloured ones with red rhinestones. And then we've got gold and clear and black on these beautiful matched pair just here. Then we've got some absolutely vast to go with them. Huge. A couple more bead caps in here as well. Either side, it's book matched, so you've got a perfect matched strand this time around. These are fantastic, really, really gorgeous, like a little bit of a hint of a gold bead work going around, as well as these. They're very reminiscent of marquisite. Really lovely metallic lustre on the crystals that have been encrusted onto this type. And then we've got these. Now there's a type of sweetie in the United Kingdom that looks ever so much like this. I don't know if you have it stateside. I think it's an aniseed ball. Can't really remember. I don't eat them anyway. And then at the heart of the gorgeous Girls' Night Out strand, you have got this monster-sized bead. Absolutely gorgeous. A festival of textures on here. Golden dot work. And then the crystals that you've got encrusted on here, rhinestones, whatever they are, I don't profess to know what they are. They've got like an AB, almost an opal-like shift to them. Very, very pretty gold and a matte black. So it's a beautiful strand, and this one is called Girls' Night Out. Now, like I said, you don't have to be a girl to enjoy it. It's a gorgeous feast for the senses, all the different colours and textures on there. You've got you've got a couple of different tones of reds in there as well. So you've got quite an exotic, almost mogok, pigeon blood ruby colour on these little crystals encrusted on the silver tone spacers, and then you've got a much mistier red on those. So it's a really beautiful strand. Let's unleash the beads. Let's unleash the beads. So if we start at this end, I'm going to cut away the squished crimp, and I'm actually going to use one of these spacers in our design today. So we're definitely going to be using these. Don't ever discard them. Let's bring that down ever so slightly. And let's unleash the beads. Here we go. Whoosh. All in a great big puddle of unleashed beads. There you have the Girls' Night Out strand. It's a lovely collection. Now let's take a look at the piece we're going to make together today. So I've unleashed the beads. Let's have a look at the pendant we're going to work up together today. So it's a fancy drop pendant. Now with these, I like to wear them quite long. I like to have pendants that drop down. I tend to wear a 15 or a 16-inch necklace, and then I will have quite a long drop on the pendant, so it sits quite high on the body. But you can play around with how many beads you're going to use on a piece like this. It doesn't have to be 3, you don't have to use bead caps, you also don't have to include those little spacer beads at the end of the strands. I'm going to show you this on the board now just a little bit more closely. So look at all those unleashed beads in their beautiful colours and textures, absolutely gorgeous. This is the pendant we're going to work together today. So we've got a spiral star down at the bottom. That's where we're going to start our design. I've chosen to use the slightly larger faceted rondelles. Each of those is surrounded by one of those filigree bead caps. In the centre we've got the multi-tonal, I don't know what to call it, a giant round bobbly bead, I suppose one could call it. That's not a very accurate description, but still. And either side of that I've used the slightly smaller of those bead caps that are included on the strand. So that's what we're going to work up together today. It's a really lovely couple of techniques to work with and absolutely accessible to anyone, even those new to wire work. So if I pop the pendant down, let's have a look at the beads. You get loads on a strand. Guess what? These are the ones that we're not even going to be using today. This is what we're going to use from the strand, and this is what you've got still to play with from the one single strand of Girls' Night Out. So here are the beads we're going to work with. Let's just pop them on the board. Hopefully they won't roll around too much, although knowing me, they probably will. That's just how my beads tend to literally roll. So there we go, we're just going to get those all set up. I can't get the spacer bead out, it keeps wanting to hide. There we go. So we are all set to go with our beads. We'll leave that up there as a bit of a reference point. Maybe I'll put that in the corner. And there we go. Let's clear some space and talk about wire. Now all of the beads that I'm using today fit on 18 gauge wire. With a design like this you can size that wire slightly heavier or slightly lighter. It is indeed absolutely up to you. I'm going to work with round 18 gauge raw copper, and that is equivalent in the UK to 1mm diameter wire. So this raw copper is quite soft, it's like a light temper. If you wanted to work with a medium temper German style wire, the technique will work exactly the same. I've cut around about 20 to 22 inches of that 18 gauge wire, and I'm just going to start by warming the very beginning. Just going to get that nice and fluid the first couple of inches. If you can hear the end of the wire banging, it's just beneath my microphone. What we're going to do now is grab hold of some round nose pliers. Let's get the tail of the wire out of the way. And we're going to start by turning a small spiral. So I'm gripping at the very end of my pliers, the end of that wire. You do need quite a firm grip or the pliers will simply slip off, as they are doing here. And we're just going to start that rotating around until we get a small circular motion going. So if I show you that upwards to the board, you can see we've got a circle and a bit. So I'm going to make sure that that is flat and smooth, as if you could hold it between two panes of glass, and then I'm going to start rotating that coil around until I have a second pass of wire from the beginning point. So you can see we've started, we've gone round once, we've gone round a second time, and now we're ready to change the angle of the wire slightly. So I'm going to pop my bent chain nose pliers underneath. As long as your pliers have straight surfaces, they don't have to be bent chain nose, they can be standard chain nose or flat pliers. I'm going to hold this very firmly and just push the disc, or the double circular form that we've made, away ever so slightly. You might need to just mess with that until you get a good angle. Now, when I'm making coiled head pins, I will want the angle to come away as if the wire is going to pass through the centre of that spiral section. We're not going to do that today, it's a much softer angle. So if you imagine that line, it's going to only pass through about a quarter of that circle. So let me just see if I can find a straight edge. Normally I would want the wire, the imaginary line following the wire, to pass directly through the centre of the spiral. Today I want it to pass, I just align that like so. You'll see that's only travelling across just 1/4 across the surface of that circular form. And the reason for that is we want quite a delicate angle to come away, because what we're going to do is make little star shapes, or little prongs or rays coming out from that spiral. So what I've done is taken quite a gentle angle and then brought that sharply back. Now you can, if you want to, tighten that angle very, very gently. In terms of making all of those the same size, so let's pick up the piece, they're quite soft here. It's more like a starfish than a starburst. I quite like that design, but if you want to make those all exactly the same dimension, you can use a straight edged pliers like this and pop a little mark on those pliers at the point at which you want to measure. I'm just going to eyeball it because I'm a bit of a rebel like that. So I'm going to bring the angle of the wire back so that it touches that double spiral in the middle. And then I'm going to repeat the same process. So I'm bringing the wire away again. And I'm just going to close that up ever so slightly. You don't have to close these super tight, they can be super wide. If you only want 4 prongs on your star, 5 prongs, 6 prongs, whatever you can get to fit. They're not really prongs, but you know what I mean. So I'm going to pop those pliers back in, draw the wire back so that it meets that double spiral section. And I'm just going to do that a couple of times until I'm happy with my starburst, starfish, spiral with a little bit of extra. Whatever you want to think of it, the technique as you move round is exactly the same. I'm just trying to move my hand so that you can see best what is going on. If your angle is a little bit too soft at the end, like I said before, you can just very softly tighten that up. The temptation here is to close that quite firmly. If you completely close the wires up, it can be a bit tricky to get the pliers in to get the next bend angle going. So I tend to leave those slightly open, and then at a later date, if I want to, I can just pinch those ever so slightly together to change the dimension. If you find that one side is much longer than the other, because we warmed that wire, what I would do is open the angle out slightly and just move that bend along a little bit by opening and closing the pliers until it sits where I want it to. So this is far from perfect, but I'm not overly worried about it. What I want to do is show you the basic technique for getting a starburst effect, moving around that central double spiral. So bring the wire back to the outer of those 2 circles, and then just continue until you meet the point at which you first move the wire away from the spiral section. So just going to fine up that angle slightly so it's a little bit sharper. Bring the wire back down to that central section. When I get to my 5th leg or starburst, it's going to be tricky to get a 6th one in there if I leave those shapes and sizes as they are. So I've got a choice here. I can either open the angles out slightly and have 5 bursts coming out of my central spiral section, or I can close them up slightly and fit a 6th one in. Well, you know, more is more today, so we're just going to close those up slightly, but not too much. And then we're just going to ensure that each of those inner angles meets back as close as possible to that central spiral. And you'll see just by closing these angles up a little bit, there's now space for me to put that 6th, I'm going to call it a leg. I realise it's not really a leg, but I think you understand what I mean. So I'm going to bring that back to the outer spiral, and then I'm going to take the pliers just a little away from that outer spiral so that when I make the last bend coming up, it doesn't get too cramped in this zone just here. So this final half leg section is slightly shorter because it's resting against the first one that we made. I'm going to switch back to my bent chain nose pliers because they are my favourites. Now you can obviously spend a lot of time getting this to sit exactly how you want it to. I'm just going to take a second to slightly sharpen up those ends. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but you absolutely can make that exactly how you want it to be. The next thing that I need to do is straighten up this next couple of inches. So I'm going to push down ever so slightly and then push up and push down and push up, and in doing that I'm adding some warmth and heat to the wire, but I'm also trying to get rid of any kinks that are in there. Now if you really struggle to remove any kinks that you've accidentally put in whilst you were making these legs on the starburst, we're going to cover this first 1.5 inches with beads. So it doesn't matter open and close those pliers on top of the wire and to the sides of the wire. You'll get it nice and straight. Doesn't matter if you mark that wire because we're going to festoon it with beads anyway. Now my chosen bead order, what I'm going to do is take this off screen and find the very end of my wire, and I'm going to add the beads in a particular order. So for me, these little spacer beads that you get on the end of the Jessie James Beads Girls Night Out strand, really useful. Sometimes when you seat a bead above an angle such as this, the bead will want to sit at a funny angle. It won't sit up directly straight, it might go slightly sideways. To help me overcome that, I'm going to use one of these free little spacer beads that's attached to the strand. I then chose to use the larger bead cap for the smaller bead, and I do like to play around with design ideas like this. Traditionally in jewellery you might start with a smaller bead and graduate down to the largest bead. I quite like to turn that on its head, or put the largest bead caps on the smallest beads. They're feisty, these ones. Let's get that onto the bead, and then we're going to add one of the really very attractive high shine, and it's kind of reminiscent of the design that we've added down at the bottom, albeit this has 5 legs and I made a starburst with 6 legs. And I'm going to add that giant sweetie bead and then repeat in reverse order going the other way. So we're just going to add on another filigree bead cap. All of these went onto my 18 gauge round wire without any issues whatsoever. And then I'm going to finish, for the sake of symmetry, with another of those spare freebies. And then we'll draw that all the way along the wire until we get to here. So I've got a load of wire over here and it's going to hit the camera or the microphone or something at some point, so forgive me for any noises that you hear. What I'm going to do now is make sure that this is oriented correctly and I'm happy with how everything is looking. I really like that. So I've allowed a small amount of space to encircle that central core wire with a few extra swooshes of this nice smooth arching wire around the outside. So when I take the wire forwards in just a second, I don't want those beads stacked hard together. What you may find is that your bead caps will slightly change their shape as you push them down onto the beads. So it's possible that there'll be a little bit of a gap to begin with anyway. What I'm suggesting here is that you allow the breadth, quite a good breadth of a pair of pliers at the top. So my starburst is flat to the desk and I'm going to bring the main wire up and forwards. If I turn that sideways, you'll see what I mean. So that's a 90-degree forwards bend. I'm then going to grab my bail making pliers to create a nice large round form up at the top, onto which I can thread my pendant later. So I think I'm going to go for quite a large one. I'm going to use step number 5. You can use any round form or the very base of your round pliers if you prefer. And I'm just bringing that wire circling around so that we've got a circular form centralised at the top of that core wire. The core is the wire that runs through the centre of all those beads. So the next thing I'm going to do is wrap twice just below the angle that we made with the long tail of wire. I've sent it spinning. Hardly a surprise. So I'm pulling the wire around tightly, but I'm also gripping very tightly, and in that way we shouldn't lose that round shape. So we're going to go for once, and we hit the camera and the microphone then, and then a second time. Now if those little coils come apart slightly, you can very gently and carefully ask them politely to sit neatly into position. If you occasionally warm the wire like this, things tend to be fairly good to you and you're usually able to bring things back to how you want them to be. It's very easy to have things move just slightly out of how you would like them to be. So the next part of today's Girls' Night Out from Jessie James Beads is to start swooping the wires around. Now with a design like this, there really are no rules. So my wire, I've just got the one length single gauge of wire today. We started with 20 or 22 inches or so of 18 gauge wire. It's just one single length of one single gauge plus your strand. Really easy to work with. If I am starting on the top of that core wire, as I am right now, I can bring the wire underneath and circle it between the beads here. I can bring it over the top and circle it around. Absolutely up to you. There are no rules. This is a beautiful and very fluid, very moving design. It inspires flow. I love these. If I'm stuck and I have lost my creativity, I will often put together a pendant like this because it enables me to feel like I'm creating correctly. Do you know what I mean? I'm just having a bit of a flow. So I'm going to put some really lovely intense heat into this first section of wire, and I'm just doing that with one forefinger on my dominant hand whilst I grip the bail with my non-dominant hand. I'm going to allow the wire now to just circle around until it goes between the top bead and the middle bead. So I'm just going to pop that out of the way, otherwise it is going to get thwonked into infinity. So you can make the wire do what... I'm just going to show you a little trick. It's starting to really get on my nerves. The tail of this wire is very, very long. I've super warmed that, and I'm just going to put a little bit of a circle in it because it keeps scratching and it's very annoying. There we go. So you can work with your wire not on a great big reel, but you can certainly coil some of it up to reduce your stress factor. So I'm going to ensure that I'm happy with the shape and form of that first section. I think I'm actually going to keep that quite close to the beads today, and I'm pushing that down. The tail of wire is pushed down so that it sits on top of the core wire. I quite like this arc that I've created, so I'm going to wrap around the core wire once and bring it all the way back so that it continues on its way. Two things to be aware of. If you pull too hard on this side, you can reduce the wire here. That will mean two things. One, your shape that you've chosen can change, become smaller, become uneven. Two, you can even pull the bail over sideways. It's usually fixable, but if you pinch very, very firmly, you can avoid both of those problems anyway. So I'm going to pinch that wire very firmly, draw the long tail of wire all the way around the core and onwards. So it's circled over the top of the core, underneath, and back forwards again, as if it hasn't stopped at all. It's almost a seamless design. You can, of course, if you're looking, see that it has dropped down a level, but it's a really lovely way to attach a long strand of travelling or flowing wire to your core without losing that essence of flow. So I'm going to repeat now, and I think I'm going to go again from the top all the way around. I think I might go to the underside this time. So I'm going to, again, a little bit of warmth into that wire first, draw the wire to the back of the design this time, and pull that up into the small gap that you left, making sure that you're between the two outsides of those bead caps. Pull that up nice and firmly, draw the wire all the way around so that you continue with that flow. So this is a lovely flowing design. We've come all the way around, circled once, all the way around, circled once. So the wire is now underneath, and like I said before, there are no rules. You can do whatever you fancy. So I think I'm going to do a switcheroo. I'm going to come from underneath to over the top. So I'm going to open up just a little bit of that coiled section at the back there, a little bit of heat into the wire first, and then I'm going to draw that around. Now it would be quite tricky for me to get underneath that spacer bead. We started on top of the spacer bead. If you are an absolute sucker for symmetry, this might hurt your brain slightly, but I'm going to bring the wire around under the bead, but over the top of that spacer. Heat and warmth into the wire first, all the way around. Doesn't have to circle directly onto the bead, you can give it a bit of space if you want to. And then once that's in position, give it a pinch, bring the wire all the way around and back. So the wire is always travelling exactly once around the core and continuing as if it didn't do anything. So this is why it's a flow pendant. We're always flowing with our wire. So I'm going to go all the way back up now. If you wanted to, you could take the wire to the back of the design, trim it very, very neatly and tuck the tail away, and then you've got a one direction flow. I'm going to go all the way around in the opposite now. So because my wire came from underneath to the top, I'd quite like to see it going from the top to underneath. Like I said before, no rules. So let's get that super warmed. Draw the wire across the bead and underneath. So you can see that's going underneath. Now it's on top of that first circuit that we made. Drawing that wire all the way around the core. So you can see where we're going to go next. The wire is underneath, so I'm going to bring it to the top side again. Open out that little coil if you chose to make one. If you don't have to worry about cameras and the such, you don't really need to worry about it. As long as you're not like bodging the cat off the sofa, all will be fine. So let's put some warmth and heat into this. Draw that all the way around and over. Again, you can bring it directly next to the bead, like so, or you can have a small gap. Absolutely within your control. So I'm going to pinch that, draw the wire all the way around that core, all the way back to the front, so we have got that complete flow going. Last manoeuvre then, we're going to go from the front, I think, to the front, because that's what I did on the first run through. So the wire is sitting over the front of the core. I'm going to try and replicate the shape and size of this first little loop that we made up here. If you want to go around to the back, you absolutely do that. Jewellery with wire is all about making something that you can be inspired by a technique like this, by like the flow pendant, but you can absolutely make it your own, put your own stamp on it. So again, a little bit of warmth. The wire's seen quite a lot of work hardening because we're constantly bending it around, and it will firm up when that happens. So a little bit more warmth there. I'm going to use my thumb as a guide to begin with so I get a nice shape. Allow that to sit over the front. If things don't go quite how you want them to, this is actually looking okay, but if they don't, you can open it slightly with your pliers. Don't be afraid to get in there. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about using a dipped coating. There are various brands on the market and they will protect your wire from your tools. However, you can simply use small movements, small careful movements will get you wherever you need to go basically. So I'm going to pinch the loose section of wire into position and draw that around the top 1.5 times, and we've basically completed the technique of the drop flow pendant for girls' night out. If you think that it's slightly too wide on the one side, I think that's ever so slightly larger on the right. So what I'm going to do, because I warmed that wire, is just open that very, very gently, draw it a little bit more firmly around that neck section, and those two sides are just a little bit more accurate to one another now. I've got left around about 6 inches of wire, and I always use too much because this is a very useful piece of wire. I will absolutely find a use for that. I'm going to cut it to about 1.5 inches. Oops. Pop that over there for later use. So this is around about 1.5 inches of tail. And I'm going to, you could, if you wanted to, try and replicate the starburst from the bottom by using the whole of that 6-inch tail. All I'm going to do is pop a spiral on the end and just sit that up and over the top of that bail. You could bring it down like I did with the example that I made earlier. But what I'm going to do now is spin that all the way around. Got it stuck on those round nose pliers, then that does happen. So I've started my coil. Got that nice and flat. I'm going to push the coil into the forefinger of my non-dominant hand in very small motions. So with coils, it really does pay to take your time and they will become so much neater. Once I finish that coil, I'm going to draw it to the centre of the bail up at the top. And I think this one, I just need to bring that slightly further to the right. I might flip up and over the surface of that bail. little bit further over, like so, and I'm just going to give that a quick pinch so that it stays nice and tight. I'll show you that from the side. So I've set this coil so it's not quite 45 degrees, but it's coming forward slightly, and it sits over the surface of the bail. I really like setting my bails like this, because by the time you've popped that onto a thread or something, it almost is, if you make a slightly smaller bail, it's almost imperceptible of how you've hung the pendant. So that's Girls' Night Out for you. Jessie James beads. And from the one mix, you've still got all of those beads left for you. Let's just have a look at those two variations for a moment. So I flipped the coil down on the one I made earlier, and I flipped it up on the one we've made together today, but otherwise they're pretty similar. So it's lovely to have that flow and motion with a pendant technique like this. Thank you so much for joining me today at Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem Hawkes. I'm from the United Kingdom. I've really enjoyed my Girls' Night Out Jessie James Beads strand. I hope you have too. And I'll catch you again very, very soon. Bye for now.